Good afternoon, everybody. Mary Stoker Smith joining you again at the Wisconsin Live Desk. Great to have you along this afternoon. We have had a very busy day as a Hannah Dugan trial getting underway. Jury selection started today on December 11th, and it has not wrapped yet, as we just heard the update there from Ted Perry. What we do know at this point, even though jury selection has not officially wrapped, at least 80 potential jurors have been assembled in District Judge Lynn Edelman's courtroom right now. And obviously, these jurors will be screened, just like on any trial, you know, to see if there would be any bias, how much they knew. I mean, they obviously want this to be followed by the letter, of course, and so they want to make sure that everything is done, as I mentioned, by the book, and so that's why you have such a large jury pool there, of course. The presiding judge, interestingly, initially blocked the public audio feed of private juror questioning, but then reversed the decision after protests from, well, the press, the media. So that's something that will be very interesting to look at this case. So the private questioning revolves around the potential juror, as I mentioned, prior knowledge. How much did you know? How much did you see? Maybe how much did you witness? And then the opinions that they may have, and of course, their ability to remain impartial based only on the evidence of the law. And that's where I want to start with Julius Kim. He's going to be joining us very, very shortly, is to say, you know, with such a highly publicized case, this wasn't just a case in, you know, the Milwaukee area, in Milwaukee County, this made national headlines. So it can be, I would think, particularly difficult to find the jurors. My question is always, how do you know how forthcoming they are? He'll be able to answer that. But out of this pool, this jury selection has been obviously selected. So we talked to Julius Kim often on our air about numerous cases, and he's been following this one particularly closely. It'll be very interesting to get his insight into this case. I'm going to pull up right now the blog for you if you haven't seen this already. Excuse me, and these are the live updates coming in. Judge Edelman updating the potential jurors on the process. Now, this was 2:26, about 35 minutes ago. Judge Edelman returned to the courtroom, as you can see there, with Hannah Dugan and the attorneys for both sides to inform the potential jurors that the individual questioning basically was almost done. That's where I thought, well, this could wrap. Now, once that is officially done, we don't think it is yet, maybe, we don't know. The judge said they would discuss what's left to do and then many people will be excused. Attorneys asked for a private break to strike potential jurors from the pool, and then everybody, including Judge Edelman, returned to the chambers there. As we had mentioned, the audio blocked, has been not made available to the public. And so that will be interesting to see exactly how much of that we will be privy to at this point. So the court did take a break midday. The jury questioning, you know, has resumed at this point. And just to bring you up to speed as we wait for Julius Kim, just to give you background on this, again, the federal grand jury that we're talking about here indicted Hannah Dugan. She pleaded not guilty with this incident back in May. So back in when all this started, Eduardo Flores Ruiz evaded federal agents who were at the Milwaukee County Courthouse to arrest him. This happened back in April. So these indictments and Hannah Dugan's statements are all surrounded on the fact that she has pleaded when all this was questioning, and of course through the process, that you know, Dugan has pleaded not guilty. And so Flores Ruiz was in Dugan's courtroom for a misdemeanor battery case, but Dugan told federal agents to go to the chief judge's office down the hall, and she is accused of telling Flores Ruiz, that his attorney, to leave the courtroom through a back door. And there is some video surrounding this where there was an exchange between the two of them, and that's the really interesting part there. How much will that surveillance, that video evidence, come into play there? A lot of questions, of course, and for that we bring in a friend of Fox 6, always a wonderful person to have around, but also for your guidance, your perspective, and your intellect. Julius Kim, thanks so much for being here today.
My pleasure, Mary. Great to see you.
Thank you. You too. Before we got to the first question that I had, we did see this surveillance video, if you will. of Hannah Dugan talking to Flores Ruiz. And, we've played that now. We've been privy to that. To me, that was such a striking picture. You couldn't help but hone in on that. Again, we don't know the exchange there, but when you see that video, I guess the first thing, when the public sees that, and you talk about jurors, potential jurors, and not having any bias, but if they've seen that exchange, how do you decipher what did that mean? What could that mean for jurors? And how much of an impact does that video that we saw of the judge talking to Flores Ruiz, what an impact does that have?
I think it's a great question. And I think you're hitting the nail on the head because jurors are just like us. Jurors are regular people, regular citizens. And if we see video or hear audio of something like that, and it hits us a certain way, then it's bound to hit jurors a certain way also. And certainly, given the charges against Judge Dugan, it doesn't make her look great. But that's why we have trials. We have trials to kind of flesh out the facts and flesh out the context in which all of this is happening. The other thing that we don't know, and it really hasn't been brought out too much, at least to the public, is what Judge Dugan's intent was, what her motivation was in doing the things that she did. And so that's why we're having this trial, to flesh out all of these facts, the context with all this occurred, and to hopefully get to the bottom of what it was that Judge Dugan was trying to do at the time that she was engaging in all this activity.
Well, that's a very good question. So when it comes to, let's just say, Hannah Dugan's defense, would they have to prove without, beyond a reasonable doubt, that she was indeed trying to help him evade? I mean, I'm being tongue-in-cheek here. Could they argue she was just telling him where the bathroom was? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, is it plausible?
Sure, it is. But one thing in the criminal justice system is that the burden of proof always lies with the government or with the prosecution. And so it's always up to the government or the prosecutors to prove that someone committed a crime beyond a reasonable doubt. Defendants aren't required to prove that they're innocent beyond a reasonable doubt or that they were doing something beyond a reasonable doubt. So that's always important to keep in mind here. The burden is always on the prosecution to establish that someone is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, that being said, I think it's important to, we live in a practical world here. And I think that if Judge Dugan wants to make her points and explain why she was doing what she was doing, certainly she's going to have to prove those things to a certain level. But there's no legal standard that she has to prove these things because the burden of proof is always on the prosecution.
How much of her, say, background would they be privy to, and how much of that could they use to say either, hey, she's had a stellar record up to this point, Judge Hannah Dugan's never done anything, or there are other instances? I mean, how much, I guess, do you go into the weeds of this? How far off the trail do you get when it comes to, let's say, the prosecution?
Right. That's a question that I get a lot from people who aren't around trials a lot, who don't know that there are these very specific rules of evidence that are in place to protect the integrity of the process. And so one of those rules of evidence prohibits either side, in all honesty, from going into a defendant's character. You can't, the government can't use bad acts or specific instances of prior bad behavior to just paint someone in a bad light. And the defense can't bring in all these good facts, all these wonderful deeds that a defendant or Judge Dugan may have done to try and paint them in a better light. Now, there are always exceptions to the rule. That's why there are lawyers to argue exceptions to rules. And so in some instances, those things can be allowed, but for very specific purposes. So as a general proposition, no, both sides aren't going to be allowed to get into Judge Dugan's character, because we don't want to make this trial about Judge Dugan's character, good or bad, depending on your perspective. We want to make it about the facts, what actually happened that day, and what Judge Dugan did, whether that act, in fact, was criminal or not.
And this has sparked another question, and the question could be, hopefully you can answer this, it kind of, what I was writing down when I was doing notes about all this is, how should local judges interact with ICE? I mean, what's your opinion on that based on the law only?
Yeah, I don't know how right now, the question as to what local judges, and this is specific by each county. Each county generally has a chief judge, and even right now, as we speak, right now after this entire incident, Milwaukee County still doesn't have a specific protocol in place, an official protocol in place as to how judges should deal with ICE being in the courthouses and arresting people. There is a draft of policy and procedures that the Milwaukee County court system may adopt, but it's been a long time, and I'm not sure that's going to be coming anytime soon, quite frankly. But it's tough. This is why we're here today, because I think a lot of these judges were left to try and use their best judgment, given their limited knowledge of how the laws work, the difference between these administrative warrants and these judicial warrants, and the bearing on what they can, what ICE agents can actually do, given the type of warrants that are available, or that are out there, or are being executed. This is confusing stuff, even for judges, even for lawyers. And so, because it's confusing, because we've never been in this situation before. This is the first time that an administration has cracked down so hard on immigration. And so now we're wading into, foreign territory here. And that's where all of these rules are kind of being tested. So there is no official guidance, as far as I know, to the judges in terms of how to and in terms of how to behave when ICE agents are within the courthouse to arrest people. But that's part of why this case is so important, because I think that it's going to provide a little bit better guidance to the rule makers as to what the parameters are going to be in terms of where ICE agents can go to arrest people.
There could be as many as 40 witnesses called to this, some including federal agents, and they will be asked, of course, to testify and give their, testify with evidence and speak about certain things. What questions do you think, I know you don't know for certain, but what questions do you think they will be asked? Would they be prepped to answer? Give us a little insight on what they're facing.
Yeah, I think that the U.S. Attorney's Office is a very competent and capable organization, and so is, quite honestly, Judge Dugan's defense attorneys. And we have some good lawyers that are working both sides of this case. So I know that every single witness that's going to be called in this case, whether it's for the prosecution or for the defense, is going to be vetted and prepared. There's nothing wrong with prepping witnesses for testimony. Of course, you can't tell them what to say, but in terms of how they say it, in terms of taking a deep breath, making sure that you talk slowly, that you make eye contact, those are all things that are fair game. I think that during this trial is not going to be there's not going to be a lot of shock value in this trial. You're not going to hear any real dramatic moments. This is just going to be telling a story step by step by step in chronological order. That's what I think is going to happen. It's not a really factually complicated case. This entire situation unraveled within within 22 minutes, I think. And so we're going to have testimony from these ICE agents, just telling them what they were doing, what they observed, and then just pushing the story along by the prosecution until they feel that they've reached their burden of proof.
We've learned a little bit about the judge presiding over this, Judge Edelman, and we've learned about his background. In your opinion, what kind of a judge will he be? We saw the trial unfold in Kenosha several years ago, and there was the judge there that no nonsense. There are some judges that allow a little latitude. There are some judges who are a little looser. In your opinion, what type of a, theme will be on in that courtroom? What will be the feeling that, things are going to be on track, things will be followed by the letter, or will he allow a little wiggle, if you will?
Yeah, I think what's pretty common knowledge is that most federal judges are kind of no nonsense. So most federal judges are going to have a very strong command of their courtroom. It's also no secret that Judge Edelman is believed to lean left, is maybe a little more liberal in his viewpoints. He was appointed by Bill Clinton a long time ago. But that being said, I think that his rulings have surprised a lot of people. They haven't surprised me, quite honestly. I think his rulings were fair and well-reasoned, but he hasn't been ruling in for the defense and giving the defense carte blanche in this case by any means. I think that Judge Edelman so far has demonstrated that even though he may have some liberal views or may have a liberal bent to him personally, that he has been doing a very, very good job of trying to make decisions on this case based upon the law and what's presented in front of him.
Is there any way, is there any chance at all that they are not going to be able to find, if you will, untainted, unbiased jurors in this case? I mean, it's plausible, but they really have this burden to pick these out of this pool of 80. What are the odds they can't narrow it down because this has been so widely publicized?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, that's a very, very fair question, but I think ultimately they are going to find jurors that can remain fair and unbiased and objective and listen to the evidence in the case in order to make a decision. It might not necessarily be easy. There are a lot of kind of things in the peripheral regarding this case, namely politics, wider politics, opinions about our president, opinions about immigration policy in general, that have been impacting people's opinions about life for the past, 10 years now. But I still think that through the jury selection process, it's possible to find people that are willing to keep an open mind. And that's what we're asking jurors to do. We're not asking jurors not to have any biases, not to have any opinions necessarily. The question is whether those opinions, those thoughts, can't be set aside when presented with the evidence, and we're to the point that a juror is not able to make a fair and impartial and unbiased decision on a case. And I think in the end that they're going to be able to find a jury here.
Well, to your point, I got to ask briefly about Eduardo Flores Ruiz. He was in front of Hannah Dugan for a misdemeanor charge, and he at some point then pleaded guilty to illegally entering the U.S. He was deported back in November. Hypothetically, how much could they say appeal to their emotions, to a bleeding heart, for example? I'm making this up. This guy is here to make a better life, to make sure that his family is fed. He came here. He was a good person, hardworking. How much of that do you think will be presented, if it's presented, to make the juror feel like, listen, the judge, if she was trying to help a guy out, helping to maintain somebody's, humanity, if you will, and say ability to get a better life. Do you think that will come into play?
Yeah, I don't think it's going to directly come into play. I don't think that either side is going to intentionally or directly try to draw that narrative into the case. But that's what's hovering in the background. That's what is in the background behind the entire case. And that's why people aren't really sure which way this case is going to go. From a factual perspective, there are some people that look at the actions of Judge Dugan and say, yeah, that does not, look real good, or maybe she did overreach. But there are other people that may look at the whole entire situation and feel like, well, I'm not sure this is so much a matter of Judge Dugan overreaching as the government overreaching in this particular situation. What's the problem here? Judge Dugan was trying to help someone that was where it wasn't clear that these ICE officers had the legal right to arrest him, and so that's going to be hovering in the background. And so there's always the chance that some jurors or some people out there are going to view the situation through their own lens and decide that Judge Dugan, in the grand scheme of things, may not have done things perfectly, but didn't commit a criminal offense. But the flip side is always true in these situations. And certainly there are people that might decide that, she may have had decent intentions behind all this, but the law is a law, and she overstepped her bounds.
Yeah, and one of the things I wanted to say is, from what you're saying right now, how much could you argue the government's not on trial, it's Hannah Dugan, or is it both in this case?
Yeah, I think it is a little bit of both. That's a great point. Certainly, Judge Dugan is the defendant, is the named defendant, but I think that the whole process is kind of on trial here. One of the things that, as a trial lawyer, I'm going to be looking at is for this whole notion of jury nullification. What that is whether a jury might think or believe that a defendant may have technically done something wrong, committed a crime. Yet, for other reasons, they decide not to convict that person for various reasons, some of which you've brought up during the course of this conversation. So I think, in that sense, that the government might very well be on trial here. President Trump's immigration policies in general might be on trial here. And that's why there's so many eyes that are going to be watching this particular case.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And, before we let you go, it reminds me of some of the scenes when Hurricane Katrina hit. How much was the government responsible? How much was the mayor of New Orleans? How much were city officials? I'm having, flashbacks to that particular time. I mean, it's amazing how we ebb and flow through all of these things where the government's involved, but we're kind of looking at one person, if you will, to hone in on. I mean, do you see shades of those things in the past when it comes to this? You must.
Yeah, absolutely. Even though this is a local incident, but for what's been going on, in terms of general immigration policy in the country right now, I'm not sure this would have made much attention. I'm not sure that Judge Dugan would have been arrested, on the side. But I think that all these cases have to always be looked at within the context of what's going on in the greater community. Remember in this case, within a minute after Judge Dugan got arrested, you have the FBI Director Kash Patel tweeting about it and other officials, and that's highly unusual behavior. So you can't help but to think that they are also very aware that this is, this particular case is going to impact public opinion on their policies.
Yes. Oh, excellent viewpoint. We could talk to you all day, Julius Kim. We really appreciate your insight. Wow. And we're
My
going to
pleasure.
continue to talk to you, of course, throughout this trial. So again, jury selection underway and should be wrapped by the end of the day. But we appreciate your insight, and we'll see you soon. Thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks, Mary. Take care.
You bet. You too. All right. Well, we're going to take a good quick break. Couldn't we talk to him all day? Just his insight in terms of the legal process and the way that things will go according to law is always fascinating. Always good to talk to him. And he puts it into such easy context for us to understand.